2. Hello everyone, welcome to the DPA Super Panel for 2025 for the third year of the Ukraine War, the third anniversary of the Ukraine War. And this time around we have honorable guests that I've invited on, and we definitely can recognize some of them at least. No, because the world is very small. So I would like to invite Andrea, Gus, and Dan to introduce themselves. And let's go with Andrea first. Can you introduce yourself?
First of all, thank you very much for inviting me, and hello to the other members of the panel whom I know by fame or personally. So my name is Andrea Gaspardo. I'm from Italy, just like Augusto, and I am a geopolitical and military analyst. I work in a consulting firm that I have founded some years ago, whose name is Epidosis. And I have also cooperated for 5 years with Defense Online, which used to be the most important news outlet in Italy, in Italian language, for military and security subjects. This is my first experience with an international audience, although thanks, in a sense, to the Ukrainian war, I have been quite famous in Italy with other panels like this, with Defense Online or with in cooperation with other YouTubers.
Thank you, Andrea. So, Gus.
So, Wyatt, thank you very much for inviting me. I am Gus, and I'm managing the Millennium7 Star channel, which is, some of you may know, it is a channel which is actually focused on military aerospace and with the occasional stray diversion toward geopolitics and other military stuff. There are a couple of things that I want to say. First, I said normally don't accept invitations. I normally decline, but Wyatt actually helped me in a few situations. So this is the least that I can do for him. The second thing that I want to say is, yes, I am Italian like Andrea is, but I'm also a loyal subject of His British Majesty King Charles III, because I have dual nationality.
Thank you, Gus. So you guys know now I blackmail Millennium7 into the super panel. Yeah, and of course Dan.
Yes, thank you so much for having me again. My name is Dan Castle. I'm a veteran of the Afghanistan War in the United States Marine Corps. I moved to Russia 3 years ago, 2 months after the conflict in Ukraine started. I've lived my entire 3 years here in Russia, and essentially I've had the I guess almost like the displeasure of seeing again another country at war, because I grew up in the Afghanistan and Iraq war, and I saw what we would call mobilization back then. And I've seen now Russia mobilized for a conflict in Ukraine. So I guess I have a unique perspective, having a combat military background and being able to see just what it's like to live in Russia while this conflict's going on. And I have a channel, Wild Siberia, and that's it.
Thank you, Dan. So let's jump straight into it. So, of course, first thing first, we need to talk about what is the situation right now in Ukraine war. I'm clear that my viewers know what I think, but maybe they do not know what you guys think. So, what is the situation right now? Who wants to start first?
Maybe you can start, as you are the owner of the king, the maker of the channel.
Okay, so in a very brutal way, I think we are starting to see the beginning of the end for this war. The main reason is because from my coverage, we have been seeing the Ukrainians losing around 10 square kilometers a day for the past few months. A day, every single day they are losing grounds. So I do the frontline changes report. Then every day is just Russia taking more ground, taking more ground, taking more ground. So and it's also quite evidence that I think from my viewers, because I don't watch other YouTube channels on Ukraine war usually. From my viewers are telling me that the pro-Ukrainian YouTubers have stopped showing the maps, which is pretty evident how bad things is going on. And so occasionally when they show, it's because Ukraine went on this limited counteroffensive in Kursk, and that's pretty much about it. And in fact, they spend most of the time talking about Kursk, so for some reason, which is what I saw on the on the YouTube now, where they show the what they are putting on their thumbnails. So that's what I see. But more curious what you guys think.
Well, I'll give you my opinion right off the bat. I think that what's happening in Ukraine now has been going on from the very beginning. Ukraine never took the initiative. It knew it was going to go into war, but it always played a defensive war, a static defensive war. And from the beginning, I complained, if you're going to lose men, don't lose them in a trench waiting to get bombarded to death. Don't wait and sit in a basement in Mariupol until you get completely cut off and surrounded and starved. Ukraine has been on the back foot from the beginning, and I'm always telling the viewers that I don't care about how much land you take. It matters how much casualties you inflict on your enemy. And Ukraine has been bleeding out itself from these defensive positions. And to me, a war ends when you don't have the manpower to fight anymore. This has been what I've been talking about from the beginning. Major battles. So right now, Ukraine is experiencing a bloodbath because of its prior decisions to sit and wait. I understand it was attacked, but it never took the offensive. So we're essentially seeing what we've been seeing for 3 years.
Okay, I will say something now. Actually, I am specialized in analyzing medium and long-term trends. I'm not that much obsessed with the tactical map, I should say, although I always keep an eye on that. And basically, from a, let's say, strategical point of view, Dan has nailed the point. Because I have always said, not from the beginning of the war, but from April, May 2022, when the battlefield started to be restricted to the area of Donbass and then the oblasts of Zaporozhye and Kherson, that this was going to become a marathon, not a 100 meters run. And in this kind of situations, what it matters is not what's happening at the micro level, but in the trends on the availability of manpower, technical equipments, and so on. And from this point of view, our predictions have come to reality, because at some point all of us understood, someone earlier, other later, that with the specific difference in the size of the opposite contenders, that in spite of the help that the Ukrainian side was receiving from the West, Russia would have prevailed in the end. It was just the big question was the time and the costs in terms of lives, of financial, economic costs, destructions, and so on. But in the end, Russia would have prevailed. I'm not saying that the war is going to end tomorrow, because there is a big question mark on that. But it's only a question of time before we will see the destruction of the once powerful Kievian army.
Well, from my point of view, I don't really see any path for Ukrainian to force a military solution that is in favor of their part is definitely, I would say that since the failure of the offensive in the summer of 2023, they have been on a downward spiral. And since then, there is the only possibility for them to turn the situation around on the battlefield would be a full and committed NATO intervention with the Americans. With the recent development, for a while I actually thought that this might have happened in case the Ukrainians were going to lose badly, and at some point the Ukrainian army would have melted down and the Russians started advancing with a big arrow offensive, But now with the change of the new American administration, I don't think it is on the cards anymore. In Paris, some of the Europeans have sort of discussed some options that are honestly don't see how they could come true, and they're very dangerous. So I don't think that they're going to happen. So now I think that the problem we need to understand how bad it is going to be for Ukraine. That's the question, not if the Russians are going to win. I understand that some may be very, very upset for this, and personally, I'm not particularly happy as well. But this is the reality on the battlefield.
Yeah. So, Dan, you want to say something?
Yeah, to me, the problem with all of this from the very beginning was that there was two sides that thought, even when you're in the community and you keep up with the conflict, for some weird reason, people sided thinking that Ukraine had a chance. Personally, because I've lived in Russia the entire time, you understand its lunacy. When you live in a country that is thinking that its existence is at stake, and you put numbers against numbers, there was no way Russia would lose. But I think that the pro-Ukrainian side really is responsible for the death toll on the Ukrainian side, and this is something that really bothers me because I wouldn't want this conflict to continue. But yes, the situation you asked, like, what is Ukraine in? And it's so painful to say. It's literally in the same situation it's been from the very beginning. They've never had any initiative to do anything for itself, and it almost always felt like every decision they made was always the wrong one. Anybody at sergeant level who commands a squad could see so many different holes that Ukraine was just implementing on the battlefield. And if you'd like to ask more questions, but to me, it feels like Ukraine never even got off the starting line.
Yeah, because I think one of the big problems is the censorship. Because in Europe, early in the war, they immediately went into censoring. In fact, I think before they already started to try to censor Russian media, and and because they censor all the Russian media, they lost track of what the real situation is in Russia. I felt that's one of the big reasons, because through DPA in my coverage, and because I started DPA Open Mic, I talked to people from all around the world, especially the Russians. You start to realize that the situation is not how it seems to be. And like, for example, when I was covering, over time I started to realize that the Russians actually was really following their constitution and and their laws. They basically have their contract troops that entered into the Ukraine, and then because the contract was over, everybody retreated. Everyone left Ukraine. There's almost no real Russian military that was in the Ukraine war by around August. And all the front line is then guarded by Donbas militias. And that was also those times where I I was covering, and I was wondering how come there is Donbas militia being sent to Kherson. And then why is the Russian Telegram channel, some of them talk about, why is there Donbas militias guarding the Kharkiv front? When they did some limited withdrawal from Kharkiv because they cannot hold the pressure, then they withdraw a little bit, then it caused a lot of anger in the Russian Telegram community. It was like, why is the Donbas militias there? And it didn't dawn on me until much later. And then that's when I realized that, the Ukrainians also did not know. And by the time when they find out, they started to launch this massive offensive. And that is I think that duped literally everyone in the West, because they thought that the Ukrainians were fighting the Russian military and they're winning. And that totally warped the entire analysis of what is actually happening. So a lot of all these funds and experts, professors or whatever, government officials, they all thought Ukraine defeated the Russian military, and they went all in. I felt that's what happened. Andrea, what do you think? Oh, Gus?
No, sorry. On this subject of the perception of the balance in the conflict in the West, I have reason to think, and I have a sensation, I don't have, let's say, proof, but it is a sensation that in most military circles at higher level, at level of NATO command, and among those people who are actually advising and counseling the European leaders mostly, or they used to advise the American leaders, I think that they are actually convinced that if there was a proper American or NATO intervention, they're going to be in Vladivostok in 2 months. I think that's what most of them are actually thinking, on the basis of the operations, of the Russian operations, the first 2 months of war, where it's, I think, undeniable that there was a big strategic mistake. It was thinking that Ukraine would not have fought, so the force was not organized. The invading force was not organized and commanded properly. They were not ready to fight. There were not enough of them to fight, and so on. On the basis of what have happened there, I think that most of the Western let's say top-level analysts that are actually close to the levers of power actually think that the Russians are completely incapable of opposing any resistance to a properly organized army. And in fact, you see that they say, but the problem is not the weapons, it's not the training, it's that the Ukrainians are not good enough to do what they should be doing. I think it is, delusional from one side, because it's obviously not the case, but it's also very dangerous, and it could be one of the routes whereby particularly in Europe now, but it used to be in US before this administration, but there is this kind of light-hearted reference to the use of military force.
Andrea, what do you think?
Well, I agree with Augusto, and if we commenting on his words, if we look in historical perspectives, with an historical perspective, it's not the first time that happens. I mean, think about the invasion of Charles XII of Sweden, Napoleon, Adolf Hitler. Every now and then there is someone who thinks, looking at the also weaknesses that Russia as a country, as a system has, which they are true, of course, but the conclusions that are taken from this observation is that Russia could potentially be an easy target to strike. But that's not true, because there is an asymmetry between the Russian world and our, let's say, collective Western world, whatever it means in reality, that makes us, that puts us in a situation as Europeans and as Americans, that we are not really able to grasp all the strengths of Russia. We can notice very well the weaknesses, but we are not able at all to understand the strengths. And in times of crisis, in times of, let's say, desperation, the Russians are able to bring about a strength and a capacity to face any kind of difficult situations that we can only dream of. And I think that this kind of summarize the difficulty from the Western world to approach Russia as a country, as a system, in its entirety.
The biggest difference between the Russia society and other Western societies is the ability to sustain high amount of casualties and be able to bear through them. The society here in Russia, if you live in Russia, you'll understand that if they lose 1,000 men from a small town, it won't make them war weary. They won't be tired of war as fast as a small town in the United States would be. You see this in the Vietnam War. You see this in the Iraq and Afghanistan war. Society in America gets very tired of war with less casualties. Of course, we can drag on the wars, but casualties really, when we sustain high amounts of casualties, our society, it breaks our backs. Now, having lived in Russia during the entirety of this conflict, I see even if they were to lose 100,000 men, 300,000 men, the society here gears up and they accept it and they keep going forward. I am telling you personally, as a warrior, as a veteran of war, it's so fascinating to see a society that says, okay, I've lost my son, now my brother is gone. I've met families where son, father, and uncles of the same family have gone. Some of them they've taken casualties in the same family, but they still go on. I met a man whose 3 of his daughters are in the conflict in Ukraine, and they're so motivated to go more. You don't really see this in the West. You can't expect this to happen in Germany, in England. In the United States, maybe if you really piss off the rednecks hard enough, but we're losing that traditional warrior spirit. Whereas in Russia, as you guys are talking about, it's still very, very alive here.
If I
can, sorry, I want to add just one little thing as a little addition to what Dan has just said. I agree with him with one little caveat regarding the mission of the country, in the sense that we have seen also not Russia, but the Soviet Union breaking its back in Afghanistan. What Dan says is correct, in my opinion, but we also have first to understand if the war that we are analyzing, in this case the Russian-Ukrainian war, in another case the Second World War, or the wars of Catherine the Great, etc., is recognized by the elite and the people as a just war for the destiny of Russia. If it is that the case, yes, everything I said before and then says also, then becomes evident. If there is a situation in which either the elite or the people or both, in different percentages, are not convinced that this is a just war for the sake of Mother Russia, of the Rodina, then in that case, Russia can behave alike most other Americans, Europeans, etc. societies. But I think that this, in a sense, this is a topic that we can raise for every society. I mean, there is some aspect that some very deep and intimate aspect of national survival that at a certain point touches every society. The difference in the case of Russia probably is that being still a classic empire, an empire in the classical sense, it is still has I would call it maybe masculinity, even though I don't know if it is the right term, but I'm not able to think about anything different. But a masculinity in the approach to war that somehow it has been lost, especially in the European societies, as we know.
Yes, just now you wanted to say something, right?
No, always on this subject, I was actually interested in asking Dan is, why do you believe, why do you think it is that the Russians are so capable of absorbing these losses more than others? I mean, Andrea chimed in on that, but what's your perspective? Why do you think it is so in Russia?
Well, by the way, I would like to say that Andrea is right. When they think it's a just war, they do level up. And the biggest difference that I've seen is that here in Russia, they are it's almost like that book, 1984, I think, where they're just constantly reminded of things. They're constantly reminded of things. And I know in the West we have it. Every country has a kind of like brainwashing or propaganda that they give out to their own people. But here in Russia, they kind of do live by it. They don't have to see it anymore. They have to live by it. Every generation has gone through something like this. They kind of remember each other's history. Like they say, listen, I did it in the Chechen war because I have friends from the Chechen war, and they say, now you must do it in Ukraine. You must fight for this. And when I'm on the bus, there's a famous picture here in Russia where it's a World War II man with his pistol aiming down range, and it's a new modern soldier holding his shoulder and saying, "It will take it from here." So it's always in society. They're always thinking about it. I don't necessarily think that this is the right way to run a society, but it works for them. They have almost tuned into the warrior mentality. Over the last 3 years, I've seen it grow more, and more. It's very unique, I think, to Russia because I've been in other parts of Europe. I've been in also in the United States, and you don't really see the warrior spirit in so many places. I, as a Marine, I only experienced it in the Marine Corps. We even make fun of the Army and the Navy. We don't think they're a real military branch. And so here in Russia, Andrea was like saying, yeah, it's very masculine and it's everywhere. It's everywhere. And now I think it's even more than ever. And it's probably never going to stop now.
And Dan has just used the magic words that should be used in every conflict. It works for them. The big mistake that we do, that I have always observed looking at the work of my colleagues, analysts, geopolitical, military analysts from Italy, from the majority of the West, is that they apply the same schemes and the same reasoning, the same methodology, like it was a Pythagorean table to every context, every war, every geographical area of the planet. This is totally mistake. You have to adapt the models. You have to deep dive into the different societies, the different countries, the different mentalities. What is worth for Italy is not worth for, it doesn't work for the United States or for Singapore, and the other way around. Why, for example, just an example. Why the Syrians have lost all the wars with Israel, and losing some thousand men from time to time, but they manage to sustain a civil war with 600,000 casualties for many years. Maybe because that war, as we said before, was something felt. It was a war for the future and the destiny of the nation. The others were not. The just war we were talking about before. And it works for them. This is really, I was very happy to hear Dan saying this magic formula that should be hammered literally in the mind of all the analysts when we will have to finally, after this war, rebuild our system of work, trying to brush aside this ideology and try again to work with the tools of the work.
So what is the real situation right now? So now we come back to the current day. So now United States under Donald Trump's administration seems to be no straying away from supporting Ukraine. They are now negotiating with Russia, and Europe seems to be planning to continue to support Ukraine. Basically, all in on Ukraine by themselves without the Americans. Maybe. But what is the real situation? Because that is just the surface, right? Because we all know politicians that tend to grandstand. But what you guys think is the real situation right now? No.
People are going to get mad what I'm going to say, but I have to say it now. I always knew Russia would be a winner in this conflict, and Ukraine would always be a loser, but the United States will go down as a winner in this conflict as well. And it looks like the United States wants to make Europe the loser along with Ukraine. And it's so fascinating to see this power move. But there could be multiple winners in a war, and there could be multiple losers in a war. And I know for sure Ukraine is a loser and Russia is a winner for sure. But just the fact that it's the United States and Russia without no one else breaking this deal off lets you know that, hey, by the way, it doesn't matter how much money you put into this war. If United States loses money invested in the Ukrainians, they'll either get it from the ground or they'll just get it politically however they want, which is something that we already knew was going to happen anyways. But the world just has to accept that Russia is going to accept it. And it is so surreal to know that Russia might accept a deal with the United States when the United States had nothing to do in Ukraine. But we're going to see. I'm just calling it right now. Russia and the United States will win this war. Europe and Ukraine are losers in this war.
Well, from my point of view, I think that so let's talk about the military situation. So as it is now, obviously the Ukrainian is in the retreat, and there is really if they lose support, it will be even more. This doesn't mean that they can't keep going for many months after the support stops, but as I said before, they are on a downward spiral. It's clear that the new Trump administration has pushed the United States onto a different path. This is a sort of strategic reset. I was discussing this with Andrea just yesterday. This is probably a sign of the overall strategy is an attempt to detach Russia from China. That's the reason why they seem to be so accommodating toward Russia. And in this context, probably support for Ukraine will dry up from the United States. From Europe may last for some of the Europeans, and depending how you consider the British as Europeans or Americans. it's debatable actually, but is from say some of the geographical European countries, you may still have some support. But it's also very likely that the ruling classes in these European countries will come around because the American influence, okay, most of the European ruling classes are a creation of the American influence. If the United States take a stable path in a different direction, then also the European ruling class will follow in time. Okay, so so whatever support Europe may give is not going to last very long. Again, if this change of tack from the United States is real, which I believe it is, but there's still plenty of room for the negotiation to fail, I think, even because it's possible that the Russians ask too much, and that would amount to a loss of, let's say, loss of face too big to swallow. Or it is possible that Ukrainians themselves don't accept. So there's still plenty of room for the negotiations to fail. But if they succeed, yeah, that's the situation.
Well, I'm going to say two things. The first one is not really a big deal. The second one is a little bit trickier. As it has been already said, yes, Ukraine is now on the downward spiral. As I said before, I'm not saying that the war is ending tomorrow, but yes, if the American support stops now, even considering the continuation of some kind of European support, and I'm thinking about the Baltic states, the Poland, and some other Eastern European countries, which will likely continue to provide the Ukraine with what they can provide. Ukraine can, as a country, can still fight this war for this year, probably also for a portion of the next year, but at a certain point they will reach the line of physical impossibility. So we are not discussing about an eventuality. We are discussing about a certainty from this point of view, and it is necessary for people to come to terms with this reality. There is nothing else to say. So with this, I have finished the first part, which I said is not really anything exceptional for what it has already been said. Regarding the second part, I disagree this time with Dan. I don't think that the United States are going to be the winner in any meaningful way. Why I'm saying this? I subscribe to the theories from this point of view, from the thesis of Professor Emmanuel Todd, whom methodology of analysis I have been following for the last 20 years, approximately. And what I am deeply convinced in is that we are going to see in the next 10 years the breaking out of okay, at this stage I still call it the event, because I don't know if this event will be a new American revolution or a new civil war, or a new revolution that will be followed by a civil war. But something in the USA is going to happen, I think somewhere in the next 10 years. And studying the American society from within, and studying all the social outputs and statistics that are regularly published, and looking them in an historical perspective, you really see that this process of downward spiral is likely also for the United States. Even though Trump is trying to change the course, there are some transformations inside the American society that are too big to be ignored. And I think that the end result of the Russian-Ukrainian war and the coming war between the United States and China around Taiwan, the Korean Peninsula, and so on, will contribute to make all these factors explode inside the USA with cataclysmic results. That is what I am saying. I know that what I am saying is very controversial, and the majority of people will not accept this because maybe it's too early and some things are not still plainly obvious for everybody. But I have been discussing, I think, 2 years about this with Augusto, and still I don't see any reasons to change my long-term forecast for the United States. So I don't think that the USA will be able to reap anything useful from that for themselves from this war, even if they pull out now immediately and they just get rid of the Ukraine.
Yeah, the reason why I say it's a win for the United States is because neither you or Gus can explain to me what the United States has anything to do in deciding the fate of Ukraine. It literally pushed itself in there, and we all knew that we sent aid as a country, but it had no business sitting at the negotiation table. And it literally is taking over the negotiations, the fate of Ukraine, and the fate of whatever Europe is going to end up being, because it's not, maybe if it does allow Europe at the negotiation tables, it's not going to be the alphas. Now, the United States and Europe are not dumb. It's better to send weapons and money than send men, because if war ever happened between NATO and Russia, you would need men to fight that war. So it's much easier just to send weapons and money. And so you don't really lose anything. A lot of people said that, oh, NATO is exposed. NATO lost a war against Russia. NATO never went to war with Russia. So if you are at the table where you decide the fate of Ukraine, you are winning. Ukraine loses. Anybody else who decides what happens in Ukraine is a winner, because especially if you didn't lose any men. But Russia is the de facto winner. Talking about this certain situation, it's going to bug a lot of people, but I personally have no clue what the hell the United States is doing at the negotiation table. It's as if my conflict, the one war that I fought in Afghanistan, if Russia suddenly came and decided, oh, this is what's going to happen to you, United States, for losing this war, because we did lose that war, but no one else chose our fate. This is us literally intervening in Ukraine. Of course, we sent a bunch of money, but we should never be the ones deciding. Russia should never accept the United States at that table. It should accept only an unconditional surrender from the Ukrainians. And so this is how you get an American victory. Talking about war, this is how war works. You don't want a random entity showing up at the negotiation table.
So I can give my input, because this is something that I did say many times in my videos and also in DPA Open Mic, is that the Americans actually have a lot to trade with Russia. And I did also say that Donald Trump don't give a damn about Ukraine. Like literally there's no point. You, like what Dan said, Ukraine is actually not very important to United States. It was always used as a weapon against the Russians, just to see whether the Russians can be Russia can be disintegrated. So it had failed. And Donald Trump come in, because that was not Trump's project. No, that is like the Democrats' project. So he came in and he just like, yeah, this is stupid. No, let's do a deal. But we have to also understand, the United States have their own geopolitical aims right now. Under Donald Trump, things is changing. They're thinking about annexing Canada, thinking about annexing Greenland, thinking about annexing, Panama Canal, which is, and honestly, I took it very seriously. At first, I was like, okay, maybe, but when you start to see all the statements coming out from the different politicians and whatnot, it's starting to look very serious. Which means what? Which means they have something to trade with Russia. Imagine if United States in the negotiation says that, okay, I'm going to recognize Russia's sovereignty over Crimea and all the captured areas in Ukraine. And then in return, Russia recognized United States' claim on Canada and Greenland and whatnot. What can the Europeans do? The Europeans can't do shit about it. No, it's beyond them anymore, because the two superpowers, because now Russia has become a superpower effectively with this war, they will dictate the world. So that is the danger for Europe right now, and I feel like that's why I said I feel like there is no reasons why United States at the table, because they just gaming it, right? They're gaming the system.
Russia, like you said, leveled up in this conflict, and Russia always has told the West, like, okay, United States, we're not at your level, but just recognize us. And with this conflict, like you're saying, it doesn't have to be Canada or Greenland. Literally, United States, all they have to do is say, okay, you can keep whatever you have, but just know in the future we might do this or that, and just know what we did this time. Ukraine is nothing. Ukraine is worth nothing to the United States, and it's just been used as the chip. To me, I'm like, okay, what the hell do we have to do at the bargaining table unless it's to get a nice deal with Russia? In this case, it's a win-win for the United States, and the rest of Europe is screwed, because Europe is so many countries. There's no way they can chop off the rest of Ukraine while America exists, because America is number one to the compared to the Europeans, unfortunately, because you guys have something called the European Union, where you all screw each other and you can't get it together. You guys don't think about your own sovereignty, but in the United States, we want to eat first.
Well, there's, I think to understand the European reaction to the situation in Ukraine, is also important to understand that, I hate this term, but Europe is just a geographical term. I mean, there is the European Union and in general NATO are a mix of countries, an ensemble of countries that actually tend to have not the same interests, sometimes even competing interests, and they're artificially shown together. So expecting unity is extremely difficult. I honestly can't see any Italian government really going all in with supporting Ukraine. It's probably there's money to do with the reconstruction, maybe yes, but otherwise, I don't see any military support beyond what was given, which is basically they just emptied the warehouses of the old stuff that had been decommissioned, and that was it basically. So on the flip side, countries like Poland have a vested important interest in keeping the Russians away, because they had an historical experience which is much different from ours.
But how long more can Europe support? Like Andrea say, 1 year plus a bit, which is actually very close to what I always tell my viewers. I say that I think Europe can support like this year, and there's more or less about it without United States involved.
Well,
So
maybe you want to say, Augusto?
No, thank you. So I think that what can be done is not much, because I think that the warehouses are basically empty. But also, I'm not so convinced that the will of supporting Ukraine will be there if the United States will insist in changing this situation. If the United States say, okay, enough is enough, you stop, I think the Europeans will stop.
Okay, yes, basically Augusto has already said everything. There is maybe one thing more to mention, that when we speak broadly about the support that the so-called collective West is giving to the Ukraine, we are talking about a support that is, let's say, on different levels. There is the military one, there is the economic, financial one. There is also the food support, because nowadays, like the 40% of the Ukrainian population is making a living thanks to the literally material support. And with the material support, I mean food, clothes, and stuff like this that is kindly given from mostly from Europe to the Ukraine. Of course, this support on different levels cannot be severed completely, will not be severed completely. So the scenario we have to keep in front of our eyes is a support that is little by little restricting until it will dry up, like a stream in summertime. In this scenario, we can make supposition. And as I said before, if the USA will say, okay, enough is enough, and we are right now going to stop any military and financial support, although some kind of humanitarian support, even from the USA, I think that it will continue. I mean, even Hungary, that has never given any kind of military support to the Ukraine, has given indeed humanitarian support. And the humanitarian support somehow helps also the war efforts in a broader sense. But in any case, all in all, it is drying up. The stream is drying up. The big question is when it will dry up completely. So I would say that the Ukrainians, if they repel completely the agreement and they say we are not going to accept any agreement coming from Trump and Putin's talk, and we decide to fight to the last, I would say that this year they can still fight, probably also sometimes in the next year. Then they will come to an end. They cannot fight indefinitely, also because the overall situation is sapping the morale of the civilian population, of the soldiers. So it's they have already done everything. It's true that Ukrainians are Slavic people. The Slavic people are people who fight. They don't give up. They are natural survivalists. They have been able to pass through historical events that would have cancelled all of us from the earth. But there is a limit to everybody. And Ukrainians are human beings. They can be killed like everyone else.
Wyatt, I want to bring up some observations that I've made during this entire conflict. As a veteran myself, these are some of the things that I find fascinating on both sides, because both sides have done this entire time. One has been employing more than, maybe let's say 500,000 men, logistically supporting those men on a front line. This to me is absolutely fascinating. Let's just say at least 1 million people on the front line with both sides. Is this a okay estimate? 500,000 on each side. I'm going to be conservative about it. Would that be okay to say? Would you think? Yeah. So yeah. I can't imagine a conflict because I've never seen it in my life until now. Because I live in Russia, you do get to see so many people moving around, but like employing 500,000 on each side, logistically feeding them and sustaining the casualties that they have. I don't mean just deaths. I mean like bringing back people with missing limbs, missing eyesight and all these things. This is absolutely fascinating because people talk about the modern warfare. I think there's not many things that make this a modern conflict, a modern warfare. One thing that I do appreciate is like the level up of that FPV with fiber optics. This is the level up because drones have existed for a long time. Drones are nothing more than IEDs that fly, but this finding different ways to kill each other. Humanity's absolutely gone crazy in this conflict. We've seen casualty numbers so high, and it's been such a crazy thing to live through. Like this type of conflict existing in our lifetimes is crazy. Another thing that I find fascinating is the lack or the Air Force and the navies of both sides didn't really get much attention. They kind of mysteriously canceled each other out. This is why when I say people say modern warfare, well, I want to say like, okay, I don't know anything about the Air Force or the Navy. I was always on the floor as a grunt, but wouldn't there be one side that is absolutely much superior in Navy wise or Air Force wise? But it's fascinating that in this conflict, they mysteriously don't exist. I understand this is more of a land battle, but maybe somebody can explain to me what happened to either Air Force. Is one not much better than the other, or is one's air ground to air defense just that great, or what's happening?
So I think that this comes to me. So it's a combination of things. So to keep this short, so the key element was the fact that nobody was expecting that the surface-to-air defenses were so effective. Even relatively oldish air defenses turned out to be really dangerous for the aircraft. And both sides, after the first week in the conflict, stopped straying close to the opponent's air defenses, which means that whatever the Air Force could do is extremely limited. So you need to have standoff weapons. The Russians, very cleverly, I have to say, I didn't expect that, but very cleverly, I was expecting they started to working on the Grom, which is a gliding bomb that they have had for a while, but they never really produced. But they came up with this UMPK gliding kit that is reasonably precise, incredibly cheap to produce, that has made so much damage, and yet it could be launched by a standoff distance from the front line. And Ukrainian, on the flip side, received standoff weapons from the West, the Storm Shadows, the Scalp, the JDAMs, particularly the extended range JDAMs, the small diameter bombs, the GBU-39s, which sort of worked on and off, in the sense some of them were quickly made ineffective by the Russian electronic warfare. Some others keep being effective, even though obviously you have the main impact is at the beginning, not when you start using them. No? But then the opponent reacts. And but I mean, whatever they received that was actually working is still in relatively small numbers. And still, in terms of range, the Russians still have an advantage. They have an advantage in air-to-ground and an advantage in air-to-air, and the advantage in air-to-air operation is massive. There is no contest. So the Russian missiles against the Western AMRAAMs is no context. Is 50% more range. So so from this point of view, both air forces ended up being cancelled because they couldn't get close enough to the targets to do anything. The United States Air Force avoids, well, that's the doctrine. We don't know if it works yet because because so far there was no large-scale operations in this sense. But the doctrine of the United States Air Force is to have some specialist units for the suppression of air defenses that use particular special weapons, special sensors, special tactics, and so on, which may have been useful. But it turned out that both sides weren't, despite the fact that they had some weapons that could do this, they didn't really think through this type of mission, so they were incapable of making a significant dent on the opponent's air defenses. You still see periodic reports. When you listen to DPA, periodically it tells, oh, they hit a Patriot, they hit an S400 and these kind of things. But in the large economy of the war, there's still small losses. The air defenses are still intact, and they're definitely freezing the opponent's air forces. That's the, I believe, I was saying before that probably many Western military thinkers think that they could go to Vladivostok in a couple of months, starting from Ukraine if they wanted. I believe they're thinking mostly to Western Air Force, which is a fact that there is a numeric and qualitative superiority against the Russians. I wouldn't discount the Russians so easily in any way, because they would, a NATO force that goes all in would probably win in the end, but the cost of that win would be very, very high. So that's the explanation that I can give to the fact that the air forces have not been so present in this war.
Well, I have a couple of numbers, if you want, just to put things in perspective, because actually the data that I'm going to give you now are 1 week old, but okay, in 1 week the situation doesn't change so much as we have seen. But this is to understand also the importance of the trends also in war, in the medium and long term. So according to the data published by the Military Watch, which has been, in my humble opinion, the best source in order to analyze the losses on the air forces of the two opponents. So far, Russia has lost 165 fixed wing planes and 168 helicopters. The Ukrainians have lost 130 fixed wing planes and 59 helicopters, which this data translate into a 1.2 Russian losses for every Ukrainian loss in fixed wing planes, and 2.8 Russian losses for every Ukrainian helicopter loss. Now, if you take the numbers as they are, dry numbers, it seems that this is to a Ukrainian advantage. No, it's not. Things are not so easy. Why? First of all, because at the beginning of the Russian-Ukrainian war, at best, Ukraine had at its disposal a front line of 155 fighter bomber of MiG-29, Sukhoi 24, Sukhoi 25, and Sukhoi 27 type of planes. Russia had a frontline aviation much more numerous than the Ukrainian one, not to on the fixed wing level, not to mention the helicopters. And that's the first point. Second point, the Ukrainians have managed to achieve this result, and Augusto said it perfectly in one of his videos back in the days, using from one side the so-called Serbian Yugoslavian tactics, so engaging Russians in a asymmetric content, and secondly, they also managed to score these results because their air defense force has been strengthened by the West with a big influx of weapons of every kind. Now, with all the money that have been spent in air defense, I find it a little bit disappointing that actually the Ukrainians have scored such a low results, because basing our analysis on the pre-war models, we would have expected the Ukrainian air defenses to inflict much more damages to the Russian, and it was not the case. So from one side, Augusto pointed out correctly, the Russian Air Force, in contrary to what the Soviet Air Force would have done, had intelligently changed the tactics. And secondly, the weapons, the systems that were provided by the West haven't been so effective as we thought they would have been. Secondly, and with this I finish this technical parenthesis, we have to understand also the capacity of the two contenders to make up for the losses. In the case of Ukraine, the only way that they have to make up for the losses is to receive new planes and new helicopters from the collective West, while Russia have the possibility to produce them domestically, with some problems we discussed endlessly about the effects of the sanction, etc., etc., etc. But just to make you one example, the helicopters, the Ukrainians received from the West 71 helicopters, and they should receive 25 more, according to what has been promised to them. And I think that in the case of helicopters, in the end, they will receive what has been promised to them. But this was from the beginning of the war. In the case of Russia, we can see that if in the year 2021, the year before the war, Russia produced 134 helicopters for its armed forces. In the year 2022, this overshoot in 1 year to 296. So this is to put things into perspective. There is, if the West had been able to mobilize the industry to the Ukrainian war efforts, maybe the Ukrainians would have been able to be supplied with the weapons that they needed. But contrary to Russia, the West has totally failed in the target of mobilizing for a variety of reasons. Some are political, others are technical, but the bottom line is that the West has not been able to keep up with its promise. And that's the dry end of the discussion.
The sad thing is that I feel that the more weapons you give to the Ukrainians, the more casualties they're going to take. I remember in Afghanistan, I was training British people and I think Romanians, some random NATO countries, ISAF. And I was training them with my metal detector because my job was look for landmines or IEDs. And I would train them and they would pick up my metal detector and they would not grasp the mechanics of it, even though it's something so simple. So when we talk about this conflict and we send weapons, different rifles, different vehicles, different aircrafts, anything that you send to the Ukrainian, it's going to expedite his death. I just feel that way because the West would have been better off renting an ex-Soviet country and manufacturing whatever the hell the Soviets were making back then and giving the Ukrainians whatever they grew up with. Every man in Russia that is at least 40 years old, every single human being who's a male here, who has not mental retardation, knows the Russian weapon systems, the Russian aircrafts, the Russian tanks. They grew up with these things. Even my father-in-law, who served in the Soviet military, he's still alive, and he's still saying, oh, he remembers his tank like if it was yesterday. So if you put him in the front line, he needs no training. So as a veteran myself, I have a little bit of empathy, a sympathy for these dumb Ukraine. I call them dumb because it's really dumb to want to learn a new weapon system and go die with it. It's a dumb way to die, guys. I don't support Western countries giving alien weapons to these people and expect them to operate it. A lot of people say that it's the Ukrainians are operating them well, but in my personal opinion, seeing it firsthand with a simple metal detector, even when the Australians gave me their weird weapons, I was like, no, just give me my M16 and my M4 and I'll go shoot that. People do not, you can't expect them to operate these weapons to the best of their ability. It's just alien weapons. So I think that the war also has been sped up by giving the Ukrainians these alien weapons. This is just a random thought that I have that I always thought about because I see videos of Ukrainians trying to figure something out, and then you see the Westerners open up that 50 cal, rack it, and just go straight to work. So it's just my opinion.
You are right. It's correct what you said.
And I just made a video about the recent delivery of the first Mirage 2000s to the Ukrainians. And it was the opportunity to actually look a bit into the situation of the F-16 program. So we have been talking about these F-16s for 2 years now. And what did they do so far? I mean, apparently they recently, a week ago, executed the first air-to-ground mission. Then they took part to the defense from the Russian cruise missiles and drones, and which they apparently in some cases apparently they also did well, but I always say apparently because none of these news are actually confirmed, but apparently they had at least a couple of aircraft that were damaged by the debris of the missiles and the drones being hit. So, and it's not a problem of Ukrainians. They're not stupid. It is not the time anti-Ukrainian. It's the fact that it takes years to get the grasp of systems as complex as combat aircraft. It takes years to set up the logistics to get the peoples, the ground crews to get the experience to do that, and it takes even longer to understand the tactics, to understand the weapons, and so on. In the Western Air Force is a weapon tactics instructor, which is considered to be the let's say the terminal level of experience for a pilot to actually flies missions. Is a progression that takes from the graduation of the Air Force Academy, probably 8 to 10 years for the quick ones. Otherwise, probably even longer. So it's clear that, I agree. You can't improvise these things. You can do something. Probably from the point of view of the Ukrainian, having something is better than nothing. But the effectiveness, you don't expect to have the same effectiveness as they may have in the hands of some Western, well-trained, well-experienced pilots. It's simply impossible.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. But the Air Force thing, you brought up the F-16s, like, to me, because I never was ever near one, the only one I saw in Afghanistan, well, I think I saw them, it's called a show of force. They essentially come down as close as they can to the ground and just beam back up. And I remember I was patrolling and I felt that and I was scared. I was like, is that thing on our side? What was that thing? And somebody who had been to Afghanistan before me was like, no, it's just one of our pilots doing a show of force. So in my opinion, if you send these things like to another country, I know our pilots go through the whole academy and I'm pretty sure they have to master this thing to even use these weapons in combat. And when I heard that they were going to send them to Ukraine, I'm thinking, how long do they have to actually employ these things to the battlefield, it's going to be a bloodbath for them. They're probably not going to be so effective because it takes years to make, like you said, the units. It's not just the pilot, it's the whole damn
The whole
the whole
squadron,
team.
right?
I don't know how the hell that works, but it's a whole team for those things, man. Crazy.
So just now, Andrea talked about the ratio of the shutdowns. I was just thinking, usually, so I was on the Duran, then I was talking about casualty numbers, right? They asked me, I was like, I always assume it's going to be 1-to-1. And of course, that pissed off a lot of the pro-Russian people. Like in the comments, they're all very angry, But no, that's how you do analysis, because you have to assume the worst. It's going to be 1-to-1. If, let's say, the Ukrainian Air Force is just as efficient, it's going to be 1-to-1, right? So each lost one aircraft. That would mean that the air defense system basically did almost nothing. if you think in that way. And of course, if the Ukrainian Air Force get destroyed, largely, almost like 90% is gone. Of course, the only things flying is the Russian planes. Of course, it's only the Russian planes going to get shot down. So as a result, you see that the number seems to be higher. So it's a bit warped. And this is also one of the reasons why, like one of the things I said earlier about, Western analysts tend to like get confused by the data and by the information. Like, I talk about, Ukrainians retook Kharkiv, and they thought that is Ukraine winning. But that is the wrong interpretation of the data. It's like you do not know who are they fighting. How can they possibly break through the first line of defense and then just drive on, like, who is defending? There's no one defending. Then you're not winning. You're just driving, So that's just something that I know I want to add on to Andreas, because it's like when I listen, it's like, yeah, this usually the fallacy, right? People will say, then Ukraine is more powerful. Their air force is better. So which comes to one question. By this point, the third year, what do you think is the game changer weapon? I mean, we have so many game changers in this war, right? Theoretically, what is the game changer for you guys? I'll start first. For me, I think the biggest game changer is the FAB bomb, the glide bomb from the Russians. I think that really changes the direction of the war. But that's for me. But what for you guys? What do you guys think?
Augusto?
Electronic warfare, in the sense that, the easy thing to say is drones, but as Dan was pointing out, drones have been existing for a very long time. What the difference in Ukraine was the scale at which they were used, but the idea, the tactics have always been there. So drones have been incredibly important because they made the battlefield transparent and gave some long-range capability to the infantry, but and that changed the nature of the operation. But the thing that is having, in that context, the thing that is having the largest footprint is probably electronic warfare, because when the Russians are capable of using their ground systems, they have an enormous quantity of ground-based electronic warfare system. When they're capable of using those systems in an area of the front line, nothing flies, nothing works. They can't do this all the time, so that's the reason why sometimes is the same. At the same time, when in the rare cases when Ukrainians actually had some Western electronic warfare systems, again, the medium and long-range systems employed by the Russians, I'm thinking about the Tornado S3, for example, which is a long-range, medium-range, actually, artillery rocket launcher with guided weapons. All this system became unusable, and also the drones became unusable. That's the reason why they came up with the fiber optic guided drones, And so when organized electronic warfare was available, it had an enormous impact. One of the things that I remember reading the witnesses, the tale of what happened when the Russian had that small offensive operation in front of Kharkiv some time ago before Kursk, and it was was reading the memories, okay, an interview with a battalion commander Ukrainian battalion commander in the area, and they said that they had a number of drones constantly in the air to monitor what happened, but when the Russians decided to start the operations, they lost everything. They lost communications, they lost the drones, they lost everything for a while, for a day or something like that. And till at some point, the Russians couldn't keep going with the electronic warfare because, unfortunately, it is blocking your enemy, but you are also jamming yourself up to a point. So you decided to blank out a specific range of frequencies in the electromagnetic spectrum. It's also difficult for you to use them. No? So that's the thing that I believe that's the thing I believe had the largest impact, and that is the unseen, untold battle that is going on.
I have to agree with you. Sorry, I can't hold it anymore. Gus, this is the number one, no matter what anybody says. For me, I always thought drones, okay, the cartels have been dropping grenades on other cartels even before this conflict. We know drones have been used. The quantities of drones, because we've seen two huge armies take to the battlefield, maybe this is why they call it a modern warfare. But to me, this is not what makes the modern warfare. I was thinking exactly like you, the electronic warfare that goes on behind closed doors that nobody talks about. This is the winner. This is what elevates this conflict to the next level. If you have something that could jam the battlefield, this is the next level. Drones, we already know. Fiber optic drones, of course, are effective and they beat any jammer, but it puts the soldier now on the front line. He brings them back to the war zone, right? And the jammers, the electronic warfare, to me, is the next level. And it's fascinating to talk about because everybody else assumes that this is a modern warfare because the amount of people that are dying, the amount of drones, storming cities, we've been doing that. I was fighting in trenches in Afghanistan, and veterans before me were taking cities in Iraq, and the casualties were relatively high. This is not what makes the modern warfare. Pay attention to the people who are not in this conflict, like China and the United States, taking major notes. They don't have to take the casualties to test their weapons. So to me, the biggest level up, the most effective, the new weapon that really changes this war, unlike any other war, is the amount of electronic warfare that's happening at immense levels. And I think China and the United States should be taking notes. They have a little bit of time left to really test whatever they have in this war.
In the fact, one of the facts that is actually clear is that, in my opinion, what the Americans have discovered quite quickly is that they are much more vulnerable than they thought they are. I mean, you're United. I don't know exactly the Marines, but I don't think it's much different. But the Army relies on these very large commands where there are racks of computers, where there are a lot of communication systems. Every platoon leader goes in combat with a laptop, connected with a data link, and also has video feeds from the drones. All this kind of stuff can be made resilient, but it's very vulnerable. And if you rely on that for your effectiveness, as heavily as the Americans are doing, you run a risk. And in fact, since they're not stupid, obviously, they are scrambling to try to harden all these communications and create redundancy and so on, because they have seen what has happened in Ukraine.
Andrea, any input?
Well, my epidermic reaction to this topic of the game changer is to the hell with the game changers. Why I'm saying that? Because from the beginning of the war, this has been such an ongoing discussion, and it's a question that was asked to me from my Italian fellows so many times that I became fed up with that. Now, seriously, this war have during this war we have been witnessing so many madnesses from the technological point of view, and likely others we will still see, that of course they are uncountable, and we cannot dedicate the sheer amount of time to each of them. What both Augusto and Dan said about the electronic warfare is true, and probably they are right outright. On my side, I would say that after talking about drones, electronic warfare system, tanks, Starlinks, the Javelin, and everything that you can imagine. I have a series of videos that I did about that on when I was still cooperating with Defense Online, and every time I had to speak for 3 hours about one weapon system, and really it fed me up completely. I would say that still today the role of artillery is prime, and the role of the infantrymen. The infantrymen that in this war, like every other war, can adapt, can be trained, and can be put on stress by the opposing armies, and still, until we will invent finally Terminator, I hope not. Otherwise, we should put a different soundtrack for this for this panel. But until we will invent Terminator, we are still relying on the old good infantryman that is still carrying the weight of the war on its shoulder, on his shoulders. And I would say that one more time, the game changer, like in every war, is the infantryman with a different.
My personal view, why drones cannot be the game changer is because both sides use the same thing. So that's the main thing. It changes the war. It changes how war is fought. That's for sure, 100%. But it's just that both sides have the same thing. So it didn't change any game. The game is still the same. They're still even, which is why it didn't change the game per se. But as we talk about drones, I noted that the Ukrainians are now talking about this no man's land, that they are like this new strategy to defend, because they don't have the artillery, right? They're running out of the artillery pieces, and they also getting the shells too slowly. They don't have enough artillery support. So now they are using drones because they can produce drones to replace artillery, and then they have this
but landmines are better than drones. Why?
They
landmines are better than drones. Look, the deeper your line as a combat engineer, if you set up a well-placed minefield, you're way better off than trying to hit scores with drones. Unless you have so many operators of drones, if you set a landmine field, and it's proven to be effective in this conflict, you have to send engineers to clear that minefield, and then you can implement whatever else you want. But a minefield is way better than drones if you're a static position. In my opinion, what is an operator of a drone going to do? Hit a target, and then what? They're just going to keep coming. You stop the enemy in his tracks by implementing a huge minefield sporadically. In my opinion, I think
so that strategy don't work. So because they say that they have this drone belt, right? Does it work, Gus?
I think that Ukrainians are sort of reluctant of using too many mines because they believe that, but they think that at the end of the war that we have to remove all of them, and it could be dangerous. So the Russians said no, there is no problem like this, and so we have seen in the summer of 2023 what a very well organized, a very well dense minefield could do to the advancing column. No, the problem is that the drones is what they can have. You fight with what you have, and the drones are what the Ukrainians don't lack, because what they have is basically derivation of commercial components. And those are built in China. Those are built in China. which is supplying both sides, probably, I suppose. But these are that's basically the reason why. And since they keep losing forces, they keep losing manpower, they can't go to a linear defense anymore. They need to trust to go through, like the Germans did in the First World War. They need to trust to create strongholds and think of a more elastic defense. But it's something that they have struggled so far. But okay, I suppose I would not be happy to seize my national territory as well. So that's probably the reluctance. Wyatt, you always speak about the reluctance of the Ukrainian to withdraw when a position is difficult, which is, from a military point of view, you're 100% right. From let's say from psychological, political point of view, it's difficult to relinquish part of your territory. That's a fact.
If I can add one thing to what Augusto said, I would like to present you with an historical example from our Italian history that maybe will help us to understand the Ukrainian reluctancy. During the First World War, we had the same kind of, let's say, trench warfare that the Ukrainians and the Russians are experiencing now. Until, at a certain point, in 1917, the Austro-Hungarians and the Germans managed to create a hole in our front line in the Battle of Caporetto, and they effectively breached it, and they managed to conquer a good chunk of the Italian territory. And our army managed to stop them only on the line of the Piave River. At that point, our allies in the First World War, the British, the French, also the Americans, asked us to push back even further our defensive line to another river, the Adige River. But our leadership, both military and political leadership, rejected outright this suggestion because it would have been politically not palatable to accept this. So we basically said, either we win and we die on the Piave River, or we will lose the war. Luckily, we managed to hold them down. But the Americans, the French, and the British were behind us, and they would have shot us if we had retreated. So that was also a good incentive for us to fight to the last man. But in that case, we also had a good share of luck. I doubt that the Ukrainians will have the same luck that we had back in the days. But I can kind of understand why, politically speaking, I'm not saying that they are doing right. Of course, they are doing wrong because they will lose the war. But I kind of understand why politically they are unable to contemplate a strategy of elastic defense with tactical retreats.
I have to say that from the beginning of this conflict, Russia has implemented its war style on the Ukrainians. We have been able to see flanking maneuvers, double envelopments, full encirclements, and even vertical encirclements of territories via Air Force. I guess some areas are controlled by the Russian Air Force, but it is fascinating to see how the Russian military has evolved. You would see battles like Bakhmut where they decide to just go straight into the enemies, not fully enveloping them, but going straight through the city. You saw the Battle of Avdiivka where they actually double enveloped the city and use that momentum to push further. I believe Avdiivka was the major battle of the entire conflict because it was the linchpin. It was holding Donetsk by the balls. And once that battle got done with, it really opened up the battlefield. But it's easy to impose your war style on your enemy when his defensive strategy is sitting in a trench. Again, I hate to bring up the trenches, but if you decide to go static, you're going to allow your enemy to go on the flanks wherever he chooses. And I think this is what really tricked a lot of pro-Ukrainians, saying, hey, it's taken Russian 1 year to take this much territory. Well, yeah, because Ukraine put all of its eggs in one basket, and it took Russia a long time to envelop them and eliminate them. You shouldn't think that because it takes a long time to take a position that your side is winning. Russia has always been favorable to the long-term war because it has a bigger military, it has better logistics, and it has more resources. So it always blew my mind when I saw Western people like analytics saying, oh, it's taken Russia so much time to take this city. I can't remember one actual military officer saying that Russia would be capable of taking Kiev in 3 days. But it seems like the Ukrainian side has been coping from the beginning, saying, oh, they were supposed to only last 3 days. I am only a sergeant and a veteran of Afghanistan. But if you asked me 1,000 times, I would tell you there's no way Kiev would fall in 3 days. Russia has been implementing its war style on the Ukrainians, and it has controlled the way in which this entire war has been shaped. They have chosen where to fight, they have chosen how to fight, and they have chosen when to retreat. These are all favorable conditions in war. If you go back in history, generals would choose, this is the battlefield, and this is how we're going to do it. The greatest military generals have chosen the battlefield and chosen their battle strategic formations, and Russia has been doing this the entire time. This has just been incredible to watch. I've been living through this, and I just want people to understand that if you've lived through this and you've seen this conflict on your cell phone, this might be one of two maybe that you'll see in your entire lifetime, because this many people fighting is insane.
And if I may add something from this point of view, there was so one thing that I always noticed that the Russians actually, from an operational point of view, constantly tried to encircle some areas, and then close the salient. And I can see from your maps, Wyatt, that they did it with many large and small areas and so on. Now, ask yourselves why in these operations there were so few Ukrainian prisoners. Have you heard of how many times have you heard of Ukrainian units that have been encircled and fought to the last or have been taken prisoners? It's actually very rare. It happened, but also with small units. But it has been very rare. So the question that I have is why they hardly close the salients? No, why they hardly cut the salients? They're doing the same in Kursk. Why they don't cut the salient? The answer that I'm giving myself is they are destroying Ukrainian forces within the salient because the Ukrainians are not capable of, they don't retreat, they don't withdraw in time. Those salients are not actually to encircle forces, they're killing zones.
Yeah, so I actually got two answers to this. One is that one of the mission that the Russians have is demilitarization. So if you wipe out the military age man, they cannot have another military ever again. So that's one thing. Another thing, other point I think is because of the experience of Mariupol. I think that gave the Russians a really bad taste because they literally encircle, usually that's the typical military mindset, right? We encircle the enemy, capture all the POWs, and what happened to that? It became a major problem for the Russians. It become a PR problem, and then yet they have to return them the soldiers. And these are the neo-Nazis, allegedly, where the Russians are trying to eliminate. In the end, they have to vomit it back to the Ukrainians because they're still alive. So end up they have to negotiate, and the Ukrainians insisted on this Azov battalion guys, and the Russians they have no choice. I think this is the main reason why they never close the encirclement anymore. They always leave this little opening that let them run through and die. So
yeah. That was awesome that you say that, because I can only remember that one, guys. And it was a devastating loss for Russia. It was like such a PR stunt for the Ukrainians. They hid in a hole for a long time, and it was a moral victory for the Ukrainians. So you're right. That was probably one of 2 times where they took major amount of POWs, prisoners, and they ended up trading them back anyways. And since then, they just envelop and leave that open. And it's been working much better than fully encircling places. So, like I said, I think that the wave has always been on the Russian side. And as long as they don't make the same mistakes, and they don't really make the same mistake twice, they seem to be a military that is learning a lot, because in the beginning, they looked pretty much mediocre to some Western people. Even myself, I felt guilty at the beginning, thinking like, even the way they dressed, the way they would talk, the way they would look on camera as a Westerner, and I'm guilty of this. I would say, well, they don't look professional. Why aren't they shaven? Why do they have facial hair? In my dumb mind, being trained as a Marine, I was judging these Russians by the way they looked. And now, as I lived here and I see how they are, it's totally changed my perspective on a different way of fighting a war. We talked about how it works for the Russians. Now I understand, okay, there's different war styles, and I've learned this while I've lived in Russia. If you implement your war style and you delete your enemy, it takes 18 years to produce another military-aged male. 18 years, Wyatt, right? So the more you kill, let them try to reinforce or get out of there, kill more of them, implement your war style, and the war ends faster. Unfortunately, we have to delete humans to win war.
Terrible sentence, but it's true.
Yeah.
Well, actually, if I may elaborate to 2 points that have been pointed out by all 3 of you, even if we analyze the first Arab-Israeli wars, at the beginning, the Western observers were also looking from up to down the Israeli soldiers because they looked not formal and not martial. But then they found out that actually the Israeli soldiers were able to fight and fight real wars in the Middle East. In the same way, Augusto pointed out very rightly about the fact that the little cauldrons are almost never closed. That's also not something new, because if we look at history, we found out, for example, that the Mongols very rarely enveloped their enemies. They always left them one way out, but actually it was a trap, because while they were fleeing, then they could be massacred more easily. So that's also an intelligent tactic. Back in the days when the war started to be an attritional war, I invented the term the flypaper strategy in order to describe to the Italian audience the overall global strategy by Russia of grinding down the Ukrainians step by step, slowly during the years. And this strategy that was envisioned first by General Dvornikov now is paying off. It took time, but as I said back in the days, this kind of wars can be analyzed only on the long terms. It's very ludicrous to expect the Hollywood style the Hollywood style, hour by hour resolution. As I said more than once, and Augusto probably already heard this quotation from mine, real life is not a book of Tom Clancy. Real life and real wars are something completely different. That we have a veteran with us of a real war, so he can also give a good account about this grim reality.
Are we going to see any more new ways of fighting or new technologies introducing for this war? Do you think we will? Because it seems like we are drawing towards the closing stage.
Maybe.
Any opinions?
I feel
Can
that
you imagine anything?
yeah, the only thing that I can imagine is if it went unconventional. And from the very beginning, when a conflict like this, when it's conventional, and armies are fighting people in uniforms and they are fighting in a conventional manner, it's very easy to tell how they're going to kill each other. But as the losing side becomes more desperate, you're going to start seeing improvised explosives. You're going to start seeing unconventional ways of fighting. And if this war doesn't end in a surrender and it were to become an unconventional warfare, then you would see IEDs and stuff like this, which the Ukrainians have been booby trapping a lot, some of their positions. There's not going to be new types of weapons, but there is going to be new types of booby traps. This is just something that happens as you spiral into the abyss. As a losing side, you start doing improvised explosive devices, and that's just what I think is going to happen. But no new weapons, just new ways of improvising explosives.
From Gus is more attuned to the technology side. So anything new you're expecting?
Honestly, I think that Ukrainians have already received that level of technology that the Americans and the West in general is comfortable in giving away. So I don't believe they will. Let's suppose that the war keeps going, that they keep having support, the Ukrainian keep having support, and so on. In that case, I doubt they will ever receive something like a Meteor or the Amram D variant, which is the most modern US air-to-air missile, and even the latest generations of the, for example, the air-to-ground, the ground-to-ground weapons, the latest generations of the HIMARS, the latest generations of the ATACMS. I don't think they're going to receive it. Probably they got to the point, because we have seen times and again this cycle of in which a weapon is introduced. It is extremely effective at the beginning, and then progressively the opponents, the Russians, adapt, and it becomes less effective. And that is mostly due to the fact. This is mostly due to the way electronic warfare and in general software development works. So I'm sure that they want to. I'm sure that the military high levels won't be comfortable in giving away anything more modern. I think we probably already reached that level. It's a pity for Ukraine. I believe a couple of squadrons of F-35s in the hands of well-trained pilots that could have an important impact, could create a really bloody nose for the Russians, but I don't think they will receive them.
Sorry, I have an idea. Maybe the Ukrainian could theoretically implement, if they are really, really desperate, a dirty bomb, a radiological weapon,
yes,
using explosives and the waste from their nuclear power plants.
That's just an IED. It's just a big IED. Dirty bombs, that's what I was trying to tell you guys. Essentially, when you become so lost, you find different ways to blow things up, and those are improvised explosives, or are they not?
Yes,
or a big
in
one.
in a sense, yes, with a little bit of radiations, but yes, it's a super AID. Yes, that's true.
Or the big one, they just blow up the Chernobyl. No, that will work too. So so anyway, we are coming to almost 2 hours. So I want to ask one last question, which is usually what I ask in the previous two super panels at the end. What is your prediction for the next 365 days, the next year? So let's go with Andrea first. No, what is going to happen in the next 365?
Good question, $1 million question. Well, if I knew it, I would be rich outright. Well, let's make suppositions, of course, because none of us has the crystal ball. The big question is what kind of deal will be carved up by Donald John Trump and Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin, and how this deal will be received by all the other parties that we talked a lot about during the panel. If the Ukrainians reject it outright and they say we want to fight to the last man, then we can assume that for 1 year a continuation of the conflict. But don't ask me how the front line are going to change, because this is, guys, this is your subject. This is what you do. I analyze the trends. If the deal will be somehow forced upon Zelensky and the war of the two Vladimirs will stop for now, the big question is how is going to hold the ceasefire, and in that case also I am not very optimistic, because I can see a lot of people on both sides that not really under the carpet, but quite openly would like to finish it off with a last bloody fight. But I think that for now I will stop my question marks.
That reminds me of Dan's theory of the 3 big battles, because we're only seeing the second one now.
Yeah, I look, I'll give you my prediction, and then Gus can go after me. I always said that I said 3 to 4 major battles, and I predicted this when Bakhmut was happening. And I predicted this because your fighting force is just military-aged men. And each major battle has to be bloodier than the one before it. Ukraine is 2 major battles in. And you said you coined things, but I coined the idea of major battles in the Ukrainian conflict. And there's only 2 on Wikipedia. The only 2 that have major battles on them is the Battle of Bakhmut and Avdiivka. And those are the only 2 ones that I justify, and no others have happened yet. When this Kursk offensive ends, it would be considered a major operation. If somehow they get it really bloody, it could be a major battle, but Ukraine is literally 1 or 2 major battles away from being completely destroyed militarily. Russia, in the next 300 and whatever days you said, in the next year, what it's going to do is continue to implement its war style until the United States is ready to accept whatever they say at the table, and Russia gets to choose when they're done. That is the truth. Nobody's going to be able to stop Russia. Russia is going to choose where they're going to fight, how many people are going to die, and Russia is going to choose when they're going to stop. Whenever it favors them enough, that's when they're going to stop. I'm not saying that the deal is going to be only a guaranteed win for Russia. I mentioned that other people will win, but Ukraine will lose, Russia will win, and they're going to keep fighting until they get a favorable winning condition. And that's just how it's been the last 2 years and some months.
Gus, what do you think? What's going to happen?
So the first thing that I have to say is that whatever stops people from dying is welcome from wherever direction is coming. Okay, so I really, really wish that even with all the problems that we discussed, even with these sort of peace talks that are happening now are going to be successful. I believe that they will be, because I think that the United States have enough power, soft power mostly in this case, to enforce the solution to the Ukrainians, at least to the Ukrainian government. And there could be some factions, as Andrea was saying, that may not accept this, but at least to the Ukrainian government, that they will enforce the solution, and they will enforce it on the Europeans. So I think I'm cautiously optimistic there won't be a fourth panel for about the Russia-Ukrainian war. I don't know what you think about it, Wyatt. You may. But anyway,
I also want the war to end. No, people stop dying.
and so I don't think there will be a fourth panel. So this is what I think will happen. The overall situation, though, the end of the conflict doesn't mean the end of the conflictuality, though. Okay, there may be other things going on, but we'll see.
So I personally, so I did a study, a research with Grok 3, which is just launched by Twitter, and I was trying to justify, or rather try to find out because my estimate is that how many casualties are there in Ukraine was that I thought that there would be maybe 1.2 million people already died on the Ukrainian side. So I was working with Grok 3 and back and forth. And through Grok 3 and help to find the sustainability, based on recruitments and possibility, we came to the conclusion. So me and Grok, we came to the conclusion that Ukraine is only between 3 to 6 months away from total collapse, in the sense that they no longer can sustain the war anymore. This doesn't mean that they will lose, they immediately surrender. As in, like, you will see the front line entirely collapse in 3 to 6 months. That means Russia will start to eat big chunk of land in big arrow movements. We'll start to see all those big arrow movements, like, towards the tail end of World War II, where, German army start to get pushed back all the way to Berlin. That kind of situation will start to happen in 3 to 6 months. And we already start to see trickles of it, because the Ukrainians are struggling to hold the front line. They are getting pushed back slowly. But this big explosion, the entire front line breaking down, is between 3 to 6 months. That is because by 3 to 6 months they would have lost so many people, and the inability to to supply with more replacement will mean that the military capacity to fight totally collapse. So which means that even if Europe continue to supply the weaponries and the ammo, they may not survive the end of the year. But that is, of course, based on this analysis, based on these numbers. I might be wrong. There's a high chance I'm not going to be wrong, because when we talk about casualty numbers and everything, is often picked from the sky. We just pick from the air and something. So, but there is a possibility, and which I does agree with guys that maybe we will not see we will not see a 4th anniversary panel, and there's also a possibility why Donald Trump is rushing for a peace deal before Ukraine totally collapse in the war. Because once the Ukraine lines totally collapse, Russia will not need to negotiate anymore. They will just keep driving on all the way to Kiev, and the NATO will not dare to enter the war at all. Because why save a country that is already dying? So I think that's why we are seeing the desperation. And I'm quite 100% sure, if I can study these numbers out and gauge this estimate, I'm quite sure the experts and analysts in Pentagon will get the same results. Because it's not that difficult to get that point if you actually input all the right data into it. So, but that's my prediction for the next 365 days.
I would like to remind you that Grok is Elon Musk's AI model. So this probably has the official line.
No. The numbers that give me is all the Ukrainian numbers at the beginning. I need to fight it for a long time. Then after that, I start to challenge it until gave up and he say that I'm correct, you know, and I start to give crunch numbers that is more reasonable that I can agree with. So, you know, in the beginning, it's all mainstream media number and also, you know, Ukrainian numbers. There's no Russian numbers inside his analysis. So, you know, it's still biased. All AIs are biased. If you use DeepSeek, it's the same thing because mainstream media's power.
I'm going to agree with you because there's been one major battle per year on average. 2022 Bakhmut, 2020, what are we, 2025 now. Each year up until now has had a major battle. The Kursk, I guess, happened in 2024. And
22
when
is
it ends,
Mariupol.
when it concludes, when did it start?
2022 is Mariupol. So Mariupol is 2022, Bakhmut 2023, ADF
Yeah,
2024.
I don't consider Mariupol a major battle. It was fully encircled. There was no bloodbath there. But what I'm trying to tell you is this year, when by the time summer comes and fall comes, it builds the grounds for a major battle and huge loss of life. So that would be from 3 to 6 months, a big window for Russia to pick the new major battle zone, and a lot of human beings will die, and this could crumble the Ukrainians. This falls in line with what I've been saying from the very beginning about casualties. And I haven't been looking at the numbers. I just look at the major battles and how every year there's one major operation that happens where hundreds of thousands of human beings are sent to this operation and they just die, and this expedites the conflict.
So thank you everyone for participating in the DPA super panel. I seldom do this kind of panels, so it's very super because if I do it every day, it's not very super. So thank you everyone for participating, and also do let the viewers know how to follow you guys. Andrea, how to follow you?
Well, actually, I do have a YouTube channel, but I'm not publishing videos there, so I'm not. I don't think it would be convenient for people to follow me there. You can follow me on my LinkedIn. I have a small but quite pugnacious community of followers there. The majority of them are Italians, but of course also the international audience is more than welcome. And there I regularly publish my posts on mostly geopolitics, sometimes also military subjects. And I also like to interact with the people when I have time.
So I will still plug in your YouTube later. I'll ask from you. I'll plug in the description so you guys can find the link in the description. So who knows? Maybe one day Andrea will have a YouTube channel. Gus, how to follow you?
Well, obviously on my YouTube channel, it is Millennium7 HistoryTech. So it's youtube.com/Millennium7 HistoryTech. Yeah, I publish once or twice a week. So you're all invited. You're all welcome.
And then you're muted.
Sorry, guys. If you want to see what Russia is like, I do post my videos on Wild Siberia, but I do my war analysis on the Real Reporter channel. But I also do some videos here with the DPA community. Thank you, Wyatt. I want to say thank you for bringing us together, and I also don't want there to be a fourth panel because I'm trying to start my family here in Russia. I have my wife, and it's really demotivating to see if another year goes on. It's just really stressful.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Gus. So thank you everyone for watching the DPA Super Panel 2025 for the 3rd anniversary of the Ukraine war, and I'll see you guys in the next update. Bye, guys.